What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about the Cricket Magic 5G to help you decide whether or not it's the right phone for you. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So to start off, my first pro for the Cricket Magic 5G is that it has NFC. Now, in case you don't know, NFC is essentially the technology behind contactless mobile payment services, so if you like to use Tap and Pay, you will need NFC to use that feature. And even at this point in late 2023, despite NFC being really popular and widely used pretty much everywhere, when it comes to lower end devices like these, although lots of phones do have it, unfortunately still a lot of other phones don't. So with the Cricket Magic 5G, I am glad we are getting this feature. So again, if you do like to use Tap and Pay, keep in mind with the Cricket Magic 5G, you can use it no problem. Now my second pro for the Cricket Magic 5G is, as the name implies, it is a 5G phone. Now on one hand, when it comes to 4G phones, even at this point in late 2023, 5G is not absolutely necessary, so if you do have a 4G phone or you end up getting one, it's not the end of the world, but at the same time, considering 5G is really the future, I feel like it really just makes sense to get a 5G phone, because if you're going out of your way to get a new phone anyway, you might as well get something that has access to your carrier's latest and greatest network. And the cool thing about this phone is that despite being a 5G phone that has pretty decent performance too, it is also really affordable. As of the recording of this video, the full price is around $139, and depending on the deal you get, you may end up getting it for quite a bit less. So if you're looking for a phone that has 5G connectivity, but you also really don't want to spend a lot of money on it, then this phone is definitely worth considering. Now my third pro for the Cricket Magic 5G is the storage. Now with this phone, we're getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. And on one hand, if you're really a power user, if you're constantly downloading apps and games and stuff like that, then you might want to get something that has, say, 128 or even 256, but I feel like for the average user, if you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone and you make sure to offload whatever you can onto a microSD card, with this phone, you should be perfectly fine. And it's also important to consider that since this is definitely more of an entry-level device, most people getting a phone like this are probably not the biggest power users out there. So even though there are going to be people who put a lot of things on their phone like apps and games and stuff like that, when it comes to a device like this that's really meant for more basic activities, again, in most cases, 64 gigabytes will be plenty of storage. Now my fourth pro for the Cricket Magic 5G is the processor. With this phone, we're getting 4 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. And now, on one hand, this is a processor that's been around for quite a while now, so it's not really anything new per se, but for what it is, I do think it does get the job done. I mean, with this phone for more basic activities, the performance is perfectly fine. I mean, if you're browsing the web, using social media, watching YouTube videos, or even doing some light mobile gaming, you will get a pretty good experience, and things are definitely not going to be slow. But that being said, if you are more of a power user, then again, keep in mind, this phone is really not meant for super heavy, intense activities. So if that is you, if you really are using your phone for stuff like maybe high performance mobile gaming, for example, you will want to get something higher end than this. But again, for the average user, for most people looking at a phone like this, I do think it will be plenty fast enough. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone will be a performance upgrade for you, because depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not be. If you're coming from an older but higher end device, then chances are it will be a downgrade. But on the other hand, if you're coming from like a lower end phone like maybe a Cricket Icon 4 or something like that, then it could be a pretty solid upgrade. But again, I feel like for the average user, this phone will be plenty fast enough for what it is. So if you are looking for a really affordable phone that has decent performance, then it definitely is worth considering. And then my fifth pro for the Cricket Magic 5G is the display size. Now we're going to talk about the image quality a bit later because it's not really my favorite, but as far as the size and dimensions go, we are getting a 6.6 inch display with a 20:9 aspect ratio, so definitely really good here. At 6.6 inches, it is a bit on the larger side, so if you're doing stuff like browsing the web, using social media, watching videos, really pretty much anything, things will be easy to see, and overall you can expect to get a pretty good experience. And with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we're also getting a taller and more narrow form factor, so if you're in landscape mode doing something like looking at photos or watching videos, you will get a nice immersive experience. And then if you're doing something like browsing the web, reading, really anything that involves scrolling, with a form factor like this, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll too much. So when it comes to size and dimensions, definitely a great display here. But But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's go over some potential drawbacks. So my first con for the Cricket Magic 5G is that it doesn't have wireless charging. Now, this is honestly more of a warning than a complaint, but keep in mind, unfortunately this phone does not support wireless charging, and if you're already used to phones like this, then this is not going to be a surprise at all. But if you're coming from maybe an older but higher end device, those phones might actually have wireless charging. So if you are in that situation and you're expecting every phone in 2023 to have wireless charging, then keep in mind, unfortunately that's still not the case. So if that feature is important to you, then you might want to get something else. Now my second con for the Cricket Magic 5G is the battery size. Now, to be fair, the battery here is really not terrible, but with a 4000 mAh battery supporting, I believe, 10 watt fast charging, it's really not impressive either. The reason being, at this point in late 2023, even with more entry-level phones like this, it is really not hard to find a phone that has a 5000 mAh battery. So while, in my opinion, the battery life we get with this phone is at least acceptable, if you really want the best, you can do quite a bit better. My third con for the Cricket Magic 5G is the camera. Now with this phone, despite not being terrible, especially when it comes to photo quality, the camera setup here is, let's say, less than impressive. Now up front, we got a 5 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. Now to be fair, again, the photo quality is decent, and for video, it can record 2K videos in both the rear and front cameras, which is at least a little bit better than 1080p. But when it comes to features, I mean, there's no ultra wide camera, no macro camera, and I feel like even though this is a lower end device, it should at least come with a macro camera. I mean, I'm pretty sure most phones like this do have macro cameras, and not having an ultra wide camera is always disappointing. So if you are taking a lot of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, then you are going to want to get something else. But again, if you're really just taking the occasional decent photo every now and then, and you want a camera that works well enough to maybe take a picture for Instagram, for example, then it will at least do that. But when it comes to the camera here, definitely don't expect too much. Now my fourth con for the Cricket Magic 5G is the materials. Now, to be fair, considering this is a really low-end device, I wasn't expecting it to actually be made of any kind of premium materials or anything, so if you were, then you will want to get something a lot higher end than this. But in general, the main concern here is that since this is kind of a cheaper, less durable plastic, if you drop this phone or even expose it to something that could scratch it, compared to a more premium phone that's made of glass or has a metal frame or something, or even more of a mid-range phone that just has better plastic, it's not going to hold up nearly as well. So I definitely recommend getting a case with this phone, and also it really doesn't have a ton of weight to it. So in general, if you're expecting more solid, durable build quality, then just keep in mind when it comes to a phone like this, that's usually not the case. And then finally, my fifth con for the Cricket Magic 5G is the software. Now, just like a lot of these cons, on one hand, it's really not terrible for what it is, but keep in mind, with the Cricket Magic 5G, we are getting Android 13, which, considering we are on Android 14 at this point, is a little outdated. Now, granted, Android 14 basically just came out, so I guess outdated is kind of a strong term, but the point here is if you are expecting the latest version of Android, you're not going to get that with this phone. And keep in mind, when it comes to Cricket branded phones, I've never seen one actually get a major update, so basically the software you get with this phone is the one you're going to get stuck with. So if you do get this phone, keep in mind there are really no performance issues as far as I'm aware of, but you will have to be okay with not having the latest version of Android. But those were my pros and cons for the Cricket Magic 5G. In general, despite some drawbacks, if you are looking for a really affordable 5G phone for more basic activities, I do think that for what it is, this phone actually will be a pretty good choice. Now once again, if you want to learn more about it, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about the phone, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.